Now this should be a fairly familiar architecture for you at this point. You have your application layer, your MaxScale enterprise layer, and then your MariaDB databases behind the scenes. For workload capture, we're going to dig deeper into what that looks like inside of MaxScale Enterprise. Now, the capture element is actually a filter that can be added on to an existing service. Most of the time, we have something like read-write splitter service in action here. And you can see that as traffic comes from the application, it gets filtered through the capture filter, and that data is written to a capture file. Now, what is in that capture file? What is it capturing? It's not capturing access or users. It's capturing queries, it's capturing sessions, execution times, transactions, and it's all putting it into binary format for compression purposes. Now, this will output 4 files with different extensions. The CX is a digest. The EX has the arguments. The GX has GTID, and then the TX is transformation information. So the digest has something like this, where it's a summarized version of queries that maybe change a few variables within it, but it's a condensed version that applies to lots of different queries. And then the arguments of those queries are put into the EX file. So you can see where ID equals, these numbers were actually executed on the master with these values with that select statement. Now, workload replay. That's how we just discussed how it's getting captured. Now let's talk about how we replay it in another environment. So we can actually abstract this. We can move those capture files to a new MaxScale node. Maybe this is in your QA environment, your staging environment. Maybe it's somewhere totally different in a totally different region of the world. It doesn't matter. As long as you have MaxScale with the replay in there, it's a separate entity. It's not a part of the main mechanics of MaxScale. So it runs as its own command, MaxPlayer. So once you have the capture files, you can execute the MaxPlayer command and start executing that capture on whatever database you choose. So as we're preparing to replay, we actually have some options to choose from. We can change the timeline of the replay. The capture timeline can be faster. It can be the standard time that executed in production, or you can choose to skip inactive periods and run through it. You can also have the choice to replay read and write queries, write only or read only in that environment. And then the output that you get from that replay goes into a CSV file with raw metrics on performance, which is something that you can put into the visualizer and compare performances. So now let's put the two together. We have the workload capture, which can be done on your production environment, that produces capture files for the workload that we can then transfer to a separate instance, machine, environment, and replay that workload for testing. Now, this is asynchronous, this is standalone, this can be a totally isolated environment for your QA testing, your performance testing, your load tests, before ever applying those changes in production. So in the background, I've set up a new workload capture and replay QA server. I'm calling it WCAR just so we know what it's going to be used for, but really it would be like a QA or a test server. Now I've got two, these are both MaxScale 1. I'm going to issue some commands to set up workload capture replay. And I wish it was really complicated so I could show you how much work I did and how great it is, but it's really, really simple. I'm going to start with just a create filter, create filter, capture filter, that's my name for it, workload capture and replay, WCAR. There's step 1. Step 2, I'm going to link that to my existing service, and my service name is currently splitter service. Done. Okay, so next I just have to call the command to start the capture, and then it's ready to go. That's it. Let's do a couple quick views here. List filter. There it is, the workload capture and replay filter. So now if I hop over to my application server here, I've got MariaDB installed, which is a benchmarking tool. So it should provide a good amount of workload, transactional workload through our system, through our architecture here. Now, I've already got it set up, so all I should have to do is run it. And there it's going now. It's doing a number of transactions through its TPCC process. Here. We can see that we're getting a little bit of load on that primary server. And it's doing quite a bit of I/O. So this is what we're trying to capture with workload capture replay being on. Now we'll just let that run for a few more seconds, and then we'll stop the capture and try to replay it on WCAR. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to let it run for the full 7 minutes that it would need to complete the baseline testing. I'm going to stop that capture, and we're going to look at a capture file that I've already done. Here, let's do a quick summary and look at what that capture looked like. So this capture ran for a full 7 minutes, a little over 7 minutes. It had everything I needed, events, tons of transactions, and 9 parallel sessions. Great. So now to replay that on our WCAR server, we take Max Player, replay, the credentials we need to connect, and then I want to call my output baseline because this is my first run, and give it the path to that CX file. And you see the first thing we get is another snippet of the summary, and now it's replaying. So if we go over to here and we look at the process list, we're already seeing, we're catching some of these statements that are being executed. So pretty good load restoring onto that machine. So that should take about 7 minutes to complete. And instead of waiting for it to finish, I'm going to switch over to some results that I've collected from earlier in the day. Now, again, this is the same process. I was running TPCC benchmarking from MariaDB, and I have two files of CSVs from that output, and then the canonicals file. The first run I did without a customer index on the customer's table, and then the second run I added an index to customer before running it. So this should show us if the index gives us any improvement, side-by-side comparison. Now to visualize that, to use our visualizer, first I have to run some processing of those files and convert it into a JSON format. So here I've got Max post process, which is the application that's going to convert this for us. I need the canonical file, the list of queries that is used, and then I'm going to start with the indexed version and output that with the name that I added the customer index as a JSON. And then I will also run it for the baseline, which was with no customer index. Okay, let's double check that output the way we wanted. Sure did. Now I can use MaxScale visualize and compare the two files. So this is my baseline with no customer index JSON file, and I'm comparing that to adding the index. There we go. So now it's running at this web address. Now let's pull that up here in a browser. And here it is. Now this is a first iteration of this tool, but it will still give us all the information that we need to make a decision here. Most of this is going to be the same, right? All I've done is add one index to one table. So we see that the performance has not drastically changed overall. But when we dig in to the query summaries, we can see that in several places where it was specifically using that customer table, there's some significant increase in performance. So for example, this first one, without the index, the baseline execution was 13.6 seconds. With the index, the comparison field, the comparison execution went down to 2 seconds. Okay, so that's how you read this, over an 84% change in execution. Now let's look at that value here in the query detail. That's query ID 226. And I can scroll down to 226. And you can see a very good graph showing the execution time change. So the baseline without the index drastically improved with the index. Let's look at another one. Let's do 243. Again, we see a significant improvement there. Now, this, of course, is a small example that is literally comparing microseconds, but I'm sure you can already extrapolate how to use this in your own production tests, where adding an index can have a very large impact on performance. Same with changing configuration in production. You can pre-test that in a QA environment with a real production workload and graphically see how that will impact your production environment.